Jai Baba. Your brother, Irwin, asked me to tell about the darshan. The last darshan that we had was in 1969, and it was Baba's wish that we go, and it was a very, very wonderful experience. We spent several days there, and on the last day, we were asked to go up. We had the privilege of going up and taking the last darshan of Baba's chair. And it was so fascinating to watch how each one responded to the feeling of Baba there in his chair. And that I didn't go up, I just watched for a while. And very suddenly my eye caught a flicker of movement, and I felt this presence of Baba, and I looked up, and he walked away from the chair and walked among the people who were sitting or by the chair and around the chair, and went among them and patted one on the head and one on the shoulder, just like he used to do. And I was so stunned and so filled with his love at that moment that my eyes just blurred with tears. And it seemed at that moment other people just were so touched. I remember little Chris Rieger, when I saw Baba pat his shoulder, and he just burst into tears. And so my eyes covered with tears, and when I looked up, Baba was gone. And of course I had never expected to see Baba in any way like that, although I have seen him in the so-called subtle body before. And it was a very moving experience. I didn't tell anybody about it. But when I got back to the States and I talked to Ivy, she said, "Phyllis, tell me, did you see Baba there at the darshan?" Well, of course you can't tell a lie. So I said, "Yes, I did, but don't tell anybody." Oh, they'll think I'm, but then she must have told other people. So now everybody knows that I saw Baba at the darshan. And it was a beautiful thing. And I've also seen Baba a few times since then. And I do say that because I think it shows that Baba's still here with us. And he just shows his love sometimes inwardly through the heart. And sometimes you can catch a glimpse of him in that very beautiful, physically identical to his gross body, his subtle body manifestation. For example, I saw him when I went to see John Bass in the hospital just a few days before he passed away. And we were waiting in the lobby, and I wasn't thinking about anything special. And all of a sudden, Baba was there. And I was so overcome by the love, the feeling of his beautiful, blissful love. I've never had such an experience of Baba. If I'd never had any other experience of Baba, even if I'd never seen him physically, that experience would show me that he is who he says he is. He is the Christ. He is the Avatar. And this feeling of his love, it lasted just a short time. I saw him. And I knew then that John, of course, wouldn't make it physically, that Baba had really come for him. And it was a very, very moving moment in my life. And so I just wanted to share it with everybody. You asked me to tell you something about my actual meeting with Baba, which was mostly in Myrtle Beach, of course, the 3 different darshans we had with him there, or Savas, which means the company of the beloved. And that really was very, very appropriately named. I had the privilege of a private interview with Baba. A few of us did, but he even sent the Mandali out of the room. And he asked me, with gestures, "Do you have any questions?" And I shook my head. I had no question. And but then a question came up in my inner mind. I didn't express it. It was a question, well, why did I go through that suffering? And Baba answered it immediately. He took my left hand in his hand, and I could feel his suffering going through me, through his, like an exchange of the bloodstream. I felt his, and he felt mine. And it was the answer that I shared his suffering. And he actually told me that later in another Savas in 1958, when I had a very bad hip, and he had, of course, very serious problems from the accident. And he would ask me every day, how is my hip? And one day it was really bad, and I had to say Baba was really bad. And he looked at me for a long time. It seemed like an eternity from those beautiful eyes. And he said, I give you a bit of my suffering. And so I always think of that, when you get things happening to you. Well, Baba, you're sharing a little of Baba's suffering. That was one thing. And by the way, I'm Filis Frederick, and I spell my name Filis because that's the way Baba spelled it on his alphabet board. And I thought that was good luck, spell it like Baba did. Filis, phonetically. And Baba always made us feel like part of his family. He always would say, you belong to me. I've known you for ages. You don't know how many lives. And so it was like a part. We were treated by Baba like his family. And I think of that even now, that Baba is not only our God and our master, but he's also part of our own family today. Begin the begin. I'll tell a little story about Baba. In Hollywood here, we were with Baba in 1956, and of course by that time we learned that you always stayed close to Baba, and you never went away until you were sort of dismissed by Baba or he had retired. He usually retired in the evening about 6 o'clock, and then you never saw Baba till the next morning. And so we stayed with him. I stayed very close to him all day at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. And then he retired. He went up in the elevator. We all said, goodbye to Baba, and he disappeared. And then I went out with my mother, whom I hadn't seen all day. I told her beforehand, with Baba, you just don't desert him for anything. So we went out and we had supper. And I came back, and there was Billy Eaton saying, where were you? Where were you? Baba called for you. And I was so upset. He actually had called for me after he had gone upstairs, and I wasn't there. And believe me, there's nothing that can upset you, that you missed, something like that. So all night long I was awake and crying and upset and having a terrible time, You just hate to displease Baba or upset him in any way, or feel that you did something you shouldn't have done. So early the next morning, about 5:30, we were outside of Baba's room, and sure enough, the door opened, and there Baba was, looking so beautiful, and Meherji and the Mandali were there. And just at that moment, I felt how were 4 men in the room, but 3 of them were just men, and the other one was God. It just flashed on me so much, this tremendous gulf, although physically they were just the same. It was a very beautiful moment. And Baba looked at me, he said, and here's the one that's been keeping me awake all night with her cries. Baba knew, of course, and so I got a beautiful embrace from Baba. And I felt somehow that I had to go through that. You think, well, maybe you had done something that you could have avoided, but actually it opened a kind of a floodgate in me, and especially that it happened here in Los Angeles. I felt years later when I came out here that it had some connection, the way Baba works with you, that because I had the only disturbance I had with Baba in that whole 56 trip was right here in Hollywood, kind of a release of energy or whatever. He touched my soul that I had some link with this part of the world, and so it proved later. And, you know, I found out really that it was probably Baba's working for a future purpose on my subconscious or something. Now, these things are hard to understand, but intuitively I could see now that that's probably the reason for it. You know, Baba wanted to release maybe the karma I had with a lot of people here, which I certainly have. So I don't know what else to tell you, except that being with Baba is, of course, you have these ups and downs. It's like you're on an ocean of emotions of all kinds. And Baba brings up all kinds, negative and positive, and you even go through this terrible moment maybe where you're actually bored with Baba, which, you know, you can't imagine. And you're so upset, and Baba looks at you, you know, and his eyes twinkle at you. And this happened to me at the end of this trip in '56. It was we'd been with Baba 3 weeks, and that constant high pitch of tension, you know. And I guess I was just kind of drained, you know. At that moment, Baba called for me, all alone in his room, and he patted the couch beside him, and so I sat beside him, and he took his hand and he patted me, but really like a whack, 3 times on the back. And I looked at him, and I felt like an empty barrel, you know. I felt it was just empty. And, you know, when you whack an empty barrel, it's just a hollow sound. I didn't feel anything for Baba, for anyone, you know, and I felt a little disturbed, you know, that I was just so nothing, you know. And then the next day, Baba left. And then it was just like Baba turned the key. As we stood around him in that airport, all of a sudden, all that emotion, that love came back for Baba. And it seemed to hit everyone. We were all just so full of, we were all crying and feeling this tremendous sadness at parting from Baba. We all sort of went through that. And I was really just a mess for about 4 or 5 hours after Baba left. And all that love for him just poured back into that empty barrel. So you see how Baba works on you, you know. You go through all these things. And then afterwards, suddenly it was all turned off. We were so happy. We'd spent all this time with Baba, and there were about 40 of us going back on this plane to New York. And we had a terrible trip. Lightning struck one of the wings and broke one of the engines, and everybody else in the plane was just green with terror. And we were all laughing and singing and joking, and the stewardess said, but what is it? How are you feeling this way? And we said, oh, we've just spent 3 weeks with the Avatar, with the Christ. He's not going to kill us all off right now. And sure enough, the plane did land safely, and our trip with Baba was over. That journey of the heart, I called it, with Baba. One of those very special things. We had a privilege to be with Baba that long. So I'd like to add a little more about the 1956 trip. Meher was not with Baba on this trip. None of the women Mandali were. And since we've been so close to her in 1952, I automatically thought, well, she must love to know what's happening and so on. This thought was in my head, and of course Baba knows your every thought, and goes like this, you know. And I said, Baba, I'm thinking of Meher and how she would want to know what's happening here. And he went like that. I said, could we write to her? Could I write to her? And Baba at this time had put 5 of us together. He would hold up his hands like that for the 5. This was myself, Adele, Billy Eaton, Beryl, and Sylvia Gaines. And he always called the 5 of us in, which was kind of significant, I don't know, just maybe in reference to 5, you know, these numerical things. And so we were always called in as the 5. And Baba said we could all write a letter to Meher every day, the 5 of us. So, but he had to read it. We had to read it to him, rather, each day. So we got this privilege every day of being called in, the 5, and reading our letter to Meher. And that was really a very lovely thing, because we got a little extra time with Baba. And he would say sometimes very beautiful things about Meher. You know, like, she is the one I really love, and things like that. So when they went back to India, then he allowed Meher to write to us, which was unique. I think at that time she had never been allowed to write anyone. And so we got letters from her about what happened after Baba returned. And in that way, gradually, since everybody wanted to hear it too, and we used to type copies of her letters and news from India, and from that arose the family letters. Eventually, Mani took over and told us news from India, and so from that we got the family letters, which are a really priceless record of Baba and his activities. But it was a very wonderful thing to be close to Baba like that, sort of, especially just 5 girls, you know. And it seemed that Baba was more relaxed with us. And incidentally, it's kind of interesting how Baba likes people to be very natural with him and not, you know, in awe of him or asking personal questions all the time. If you sort of weren't that way, then you kind of, Baba liked you around, especially if you were jolly and maybe you cheered him up. And there were people like Anita who always managed to joke for Baba, and Baba would say that it lightened his burden, because he, on the trip, very often he would go into what you'd call his universal work phase, and his eyes, you can see this in some of the films, his eyes would turn up and close, and his fingers would start working, and we would all fall silent, and we'd know that that moment Baba was really working in the other planes for a few moments. Then suddenly he would come back. Just almost it seemed like he'd come back into his body. It was such a shocking change. And then he'd be full of fun again, and immediately he'd want someone to tell a joke. And so these jokesters were very important. People like Harry Kenmore or Harry Florsheim were always there with a joke, you know, and get a smile from Baba. And I used to envy them, you know, that ability to be sort of a clown for Baba, or Johar was another one. And Baba was like humor. And I always used to think that before I ever heard of Baba. I used to think, I'm sure God has a sense of humor. And I didn't like the way they, you know, they've always shown Jesus as the man of sorrows. I'm sure he was very, you know, lighthearted at times. Like Baba told us in 52, God is always lighthearted, even when he's crucified. And he said one time that the whole universe is a joke. Sometimes a very sad joke, but it's still a joke. And you have to think of that sometimes. You've asked me to tell about some time when I got mad at Baba. Well, I never did. But what happened one time was in 1958, I had this very, very bad hip, and with all these people crowding around Baba and all the you know, energetic things we had to do, I was always very, you know, upset, because I was just a tiny push and the whole thing would have collapsed, my sacroiliac or something. So I was a little tense, you know. And one time, I think it was Baba who sent me forced out of the lagoon cabin to get something, and I didn't want to miss a moment of his presence, you see. Well, it happened to be raining that day, and the paths at the center are, of course, dirt paths and full of roots and things, and here I was slipping and sliding, and I was so afraid, really, that I was going to fall and hurt my hip again, and I got real mad at all the rain. I think, gee, why did it have to be, you know, just this moment? And all of a sudden in the woods there, it was like, I can't describe it, but I felt Baba in everything, in every leaf and every drop of rain and the muddy path and the roots in my way. And it's like I didn't hear his voice, but it was like I heard him say inside my heart, are you angry with my universe, with me, my world, my creation? I'm putting into words the wordless thought. Like, how can you be annoyed with this beautiful creation of mine? And so I just forgot instantly, my bad temper, and I went back to the cabin, and there was Baba, and he smiled at me, as if he knew every little feeling I'd gone through, and that feeling comes back to me, because we all go through these very, down moments in life, and you just think, oh, to hell with everything, and then that moment comes back. How can you be mad at my creation? Mm-hmm. At me? Here I am in everything, Wanted to hear a little story about Elizabeth's dog. You wanted me to tell a little story about Elizabeth's dog, Foundy, which she named Foundy because she found him in India. She came back with him from America in 1948, and 47, 48. And he was very old then, and of course he started to sicken and die, and she's crying over it, and Baba came by and said on his alphabet board, he will live longer than Gandhi. And Gandhi was shot the next day, and Foundy died the day after. So that's a little story about Foundy. And the other story was that you wanted me to tell was about in 1952 when I first met Baba. I had wondered how he would look to me, and I thought when I first saw him I might be reminded of Jesus or what. But actually, the first glimpse I got of Baba, he looked to me Egyptian. The thought flashed through my head that he looked Egyptian. He had these long, beautiful eyebrows and sort of a golden olive skin and dark eyes. And that very same evening, we were sitting with Baba, with the women, Mandali, and he looked at me and he went like this, and he said, Phyllis looks to me Egyptian and Persian. And obviously he was recalling some past lives of mine. And in the following year, after I met Baba, all sorts of memories awoke of my life with Baba in Egypt. And another interesting little bit about Baba being Egyptian himself, Ruana Bogoslav told me when she first met Baba, she and her daughter met Baba, and Baba was very kind to them and looked after their comfort. And she said to him, Baba, why are you so good to me and my daughter? And he said, because you were very good to me once long ago in Egypt. So Baba must have had an Egyptian incarnation. And of course he very seldom told you about the past or the future. It's like he wanted you to concentrate directly on the now, on him and the now. Of course, we know Baba was the avatar in many past avataric manifestations. And you felt like you were with Christ, or you were with the Buddha at certain moments. Like in 1952, Baba went with us to Brook Green Gardens, and we walked with him under the trees, and then he sat down under a tree, and he said, this reminds me of the time when I was Buddha. As you know the story of Buddha, he sat under the bo tree and received the God-realized state. And Baba said to us that the God-realized master who took off that veil of sanskaras, yoga sanskaras, from him when he was the Buddha was an old woman. So it's sort of like Babajan, which I've studied the life of Buddha, and there's no mention of an old woman except that one woman who fed him just before he was realized. So maybe that's the remnant in history of that bit of information that Baba gave us there in Myrtle Beach in 1952. And he would always say he was the ancient one. And for example, when Mildred Kyle met him, she was 95 years old. And she said, "I'm so old, Baba." And she had this tremendous halo of white hair. She waited so long to meet Baba. And Baba said, "But I am the ancient one, the oldest of the old." It was so sweet, you know. So she didn't feel old anymore. Baba was the ancient one. Baba always had some very beautiful, tactful thing to say to everyone. It was just the essence of that tact and tenderness toward everybody. And seeing him meet so many people of so many different ages and kinds, and feel, a variety of feelings toward him. It was just amazing how in a few seconds this sense of communion, of contact with the soul, was established by Baba in his silence, so that everybody felt his reality, no matter what their opinion of him was. Like, my father was a big skeptic, and he'd always laughed at me and my interest in Baba. But he came to see Baba just out of curiosity, probably. And he was just overcome. He came out and he said, "Oh, Baba's a very, very wonderful man, a very honest, good soul, I think his fear was that, he's going to be a gyp, like so many of these skeptics. But he even touched my father's heart, and of course that made me feel very, very good. And he even came to see Baba again, the second trip Baba made. So, you see how Baba could touch everybody. And there was one doctor who had quite a few Baba patients, and she was very skeptical too. She thought we were an emotional bunch of, stupid people. But curiosity drew her to see Baba, and I remember her standing there in the waiting room. All around were all the people who'd met Baba, who were waiting to see Baba. A lot of them were crying and, going through a lot. And she looked very scornfully around at a bunch of emotional idiots, So then I was busy, and I came back about 10 minutes later, and there she was, standing in the middle of the room, crying, sobbing, uncontrollably. She'd met Baba, and Baba touched her heart, and she said, "Oh, now I know what you people mean by love, by Baba's love." Baba just broke down all that intellectual, skepticism, and really gave her a poke in the heart. And so she wasn't, it was so funny. After she'd been, looking down on us, and there she was, just as emotional and touched as everybody else. It reminds me of another story that Narina told about this very high-up professor of philosophy in Rome that somehow was a friend of hers, or she got him to see Baba. He walks in, and he doesn't give Baba a chance. He starts right away telling his theories about what God is and what this is and what that is, and he went on for about 10 minutes, giving a big discourse. Baba didn't say a word. And suddenly he took his alphabet board and he flung it in the corner of the room, and this man he was suddenly overwhelmed with Baba's love, and he started to weep. He didn't say another word, and he just bowed at Baba's feet, and he said, "Now I know what love is." And he, stumbled out, and that was the end of his intellectual, his big thing with his intellect. And, of course, he wished Baba would do that to a lot of these, skeptic brains around of our time, but, well, it was his grace, to do that. Maybe he'll do that to some more of us in his manifestation. So,
what was it that convinced you that Baba was God?
Well, again, it was the inner experience of Baba. Before I met him, I've talked a little bit about it before somewhere else, but Baba really appeared to me in the subtle body, whatever you want to call it, and I sort of embraced him in this inner meeting and got this tremendous shock of his divinity for just a second or a fraction of time that's timeless, and that it just completely wiped me out. I've never doubted Baba. Your mind goes through all kinds of, crazy things, but your heart never doubts, and that's what Baba said the first day we met him. He said, love is all I want. He said, mind tends to doubt, but love never doubts. The heart never doubts. So love me. And when you love me, God is pleased. And God's loving means everything. Or when you love me, God loves you, and God's loving means everything. That was one of the first things Baba said to me when I met him. That May 10th, 1952. So.
That's why you went to India? Because of the operation of seeing Baba?
Oh, well, I waited a long time before I met Baba in 1952 in Myrtle Beach.
Yeah. It didn't make you want to go right to India?
Oh, we tried, but it was during the war, and nobody could travel. And so I think Baba, in his mercy, because we were separated from him at that time, kind of gave us inner experiences or, courage to go on and wait for him all those years. And of course we got letters and cables and so on, full of Baba's love from
Did Baba
India.
say anything about the war at that time?
Not very much.
That was the Second World War?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I understand he said things to the Mandali there in India, but nothing about, except that he had predicted the war, of course, long ago in the 20s. And, the greater Holocaust would come with more destructive weapons and stuff, which of course turned out to be the atom bomb. But he did say that he would speak, and after he spoke there would be world peace, of course, Baba. And at that time we were waiting every month, every hour for Baba to break his silence, In those first years, it was like you could just about exist for the next few months, and then you thought Baba would break his silence or come to America, But it just didn't happen for a long time. That he finally came in 1952. And actually, after meeting Baba and being with him in his silence, which was the silence that speaks through the heart, all that excitement about Baba breaking the silence sort of faded away from me anyway. It sort of didn't matter anymore. Because in the silence, Baba speaks. He speaks the language of the heart, the love. And that we can have now. Baba's speaking eternally, So, but of course, you have to be able to listen to that language of the heart. And lots of times, like I have a sore ear now, your spiritual ears get clogged up and you don't hear Baba. And you get maybe disturbed, just depressed, and blah, blah, blah. And then it comes back. You hear him again.
Do you recall any time that Baba said he would break his silence on a specific day?
Oh, yes. There are lots of messages and different times when Baba said he would definitely, by the end of this time or that time, break his silence. There's a great deal of reference material on that.
Did you ever feel, did you feel that if he didn't break his silence, that you would doubt him?
No. Whatever God wants to do. I always felt that, in reading the Bible, and again reading the Bible after Baba, and knowing Baba, you see that all humanity is, they're trying to figure out what God wants, but you'll never really figure it out, what he's really doing. You just have to have that faith and trust, and God is just not going to tell you everything about everything. And so what he wants to do, you just have to accept it. If Baba wants to do this or do that, or not do this or not do that, or change his plans, after all, it's his privilege. If he made the whole creation, he can certainly monkey around with it a little bit. So who are you to say? Why should he tell you about everything? That's kind of presumptuous. So, I don't know. Of course you want to know. Everybody wants to know the future. But Baba very, very seldom told you personally anything that would happen. And actually, when you're with Baba, like I said before, the moment is so eternal, so great, that you don't give a hoot about the future. I never asked Baba about the future. And the past, Baba says it's a frozen lake. What are you going to do about it, Chunk of ice, forget it. I'm sorry, that sounds... But anyway, it just didn't seem to matter with Baba. Nothing mattered. It was all like, all of a sudden you stepped out of the illusion a little bit into a magic circle around Baba. And you just didn't give a darn about the whole thing. We never paid any attention to what was going on out there in the world. At that moment, who cared about anything but Baba? Now, Irwin, that's really enough. Baba.
When Baba dropped his body, what was your thoughts at that time?
Well, I didn't feel sad. The only sadness I felt was that all these young people here who had, we were all in the middle of planning to go to India, would never see him. And that was the only thing that upset me. It doesn't upset me that Baba drops the physical body. It gave him enough suffering, So. And he's not that body. He's not even the subtle body that you see. He's not the mental body. He's, so that's the end of his mission. So, of course it had to come. But I did feel upset these young people and their love for Baba would not see him. But thinking it over now, I see that was their karma, their destiny. In one way, it unfolded the heart more. And Baba did tell us that. He said, when he's in the body, he's for the few. And that most of humanity would come to him after he dropped the body.
Don't you think maybe like some of the young people today were actually with Baba, like maybe in their last life? Do you think that's possible?
Oh, yes, that's true. I think so. You're all young enough so that you might have met Baba. You might have been some old bearded villager in a Mednika. And then you were drawn back. You certainly would have been drawn back to him from some contact with him in the past. And Baba said that once to us. He said, like, at the end of 52, we tried so hard to have everybody meet Baba, and of course there were some who never made it. And I was thinking in my heart, oh, this one, that one didn't come. Baba read my thought. He turned around. He said, everyone came that I want to come. Mm-hmm. So it's all his will. There's nothing you can do about it. It's his will. And so he knows the right moment for everyone, the reason, why and the why not. And you just have to accept that, which was hard. It was hard when we had someone we really thought and had tried so hard to come to Baba and wanted to meet him, and then they didn't come at the last moment for, a dozen reasons, and we felt very upset, and Baba said, no, everyone came that he wanted to come. So you just relax, you think it's all God's will. Whatever. The whole thing that's what it is.
I always had this question about Bob saying something about the souls that were born, like from the late 40s on, something about them being a mass incarnation of old souls. Is this true? Did Bob say anything about that?
Oh,
I forget what it was.
Oh, he said two things. He said, just in the middle 60s there, around the drug crisis, he said, all these young people coming to him at that time, like a big wave. He said, this is my generation. And it's true, they were his generation. all these young people coming to him. And another thing he said during the war, he said that all those souls who had given their life for their country, whatever, he said through his grace would reincarnate very rapidly. So therefore there must be some of you who died in that war. And perhaps that's the reason the young people today are so anti-war. What the heck, they just gave up their body 20 years ago on a battlefield. They're not too keen to do it all over again, and they've been touched by Baba's grace beside. So maybe that's some of the reason for it all. Only now you have to carry the ball now. You're Baba's generation. And that's a lot of responsibility. Irwin, come on now. You're giving me a suntan.
What happened when you were with Baba in 1952?
Oh, I've already written that up in the New Awakener, so...
Is there something you left out? You felt you'd like to...
Left out. Well, what you have to leave out in any words is that experience of Baba's love, It's just indescribable. What can you say about it? I only feel very upset sometimes that one can't communicate that. And it's just Baba's ineffable love that... how do you share it? It's almost impossible to share that feeling of love. It's just like you keep trying, and that's all we can do till he comes again. Kind of keep trying. And I'm afraid that in our intellectualizing, the way human beings do, of creating dogmas and schools and rituals and all that junk, that we forget that love. And so that's what I keep trying to remember more than anything. You asked me to say what was the most memorable point in my contact with Baba, the high point. And that's very hard to say. Offhand you'd say the first moment that you met Baba. That was really, really the high point. But then that inner meeting I had with Baba before I met him physically was a tremendous moment too. Different and yet the same. Also that time I saw Baba in the hospital there when John was passing away, that was again another meeting with Baba on another level that just was completely unbelievable. I think also sometimes just little flashes of seeing Baba as God and man at once.